Welcome to the Bible Passages Podcast.
Lindos is one of the cities on Rhodes, and that is the place where Paul is said to have stopped.
Home to one of the seven wonders of the world, the island of Rhodes offers fascinating tales and important discoveries from both the ancient and medieval world.
Some say that it may have even served as a lighthouse, this massive statue, but it only actually was upright in its original form for 66 years.
Mentioned only once in the New Testament, Rhodes was nevertheless an important place to both the Romans and to the Judean king Herod the Great.
It's not a place that we have a whole lot of information about. It's a few verses, and Paul stopped here on his way from one place and on his way to another place.
We hope you'll join us on this faith-building journey into the land of the Bible. The Apostle Paul and the Guns of Navarone. Wow, what a strange title that is, but we'll get back to that in a minute, Brian. Hey, how you doing, brother? Everything going okay?
I am doing well. Everything is going great. Busy last couple of weeks. We finished up with Bear Valley's undergrad program, getting ready for the holidays, but it's all been good. What about you guys?
Yeah, everything's great. Holiday season, of course, and so things are extremely busy, and we're also in the midst of, the challenging task and the difficult task, on our part, as we see it, to try to raise funds. Never enjoy that, but it's a necessary thing. So if you're listening today and you can help support Bible passages and people who are working in that, like myself and Brian and Carla and all the things that go along with that, we would greatly welcome and appreciate that. No donation contribution is too small. And there are lots of ways to give: legacy giving, or you can share stocks. You can just write a check, and it's a 501c3, so it's all tax deductible. And so, for a great cause, to be able to get information out to people, content that's going to help them to strengthen and grow their faith. So it's just been busy, but everything's going good. So hey, I'm excited to talk about today's topic. It's a little bit challenging and interesting, but I wanted to start before we started talking about Rhodes. I got this question for you. Have you ever been to a place where a movie was filmed, and then you got back after you'd been to that place and you said, "Oh, I'm going to watch that movie," and because you were kind of curious about, well, was the movie, what was it like when I first watched the movie, and then watch it again, and then go, "Oh, I've been there." Have you ever had that experience?
I don't know. You asked me about this, and I was like, I don't know that I've ever been to a place that a movie has been filmed, but I did. I think I've told you this story before, but Shannon and I have been on the sailboat that was at the end of the movie 50 First Dates. We were in the Virgin Islands, and some great people let us come out on their boat, and we were kind of asking them about it, and they said, "Well, that's this boat." And I was like, "You mean like that's a copy, or this, it's this type of boat?" And they said, "No, it's this boat. We went and bought it after the filming and that kind of thing." And so it was in Alaska in the movie, but they had got it and sailed it all the way to the Virgin Islands and really halfway around the world. So I think that's probably as close as I've ever been to being on location where they shot a movie, at least that I know of, or can remember. But it was pretty cool. Truth be told, when we were on the boat, they told us that it was that boat, and I did not remember that movie had a boat. So I had to go back and look and see. But it's at the very end of the movie, and it was a
I can
sailboat.
tell you, I've never seen that movie. I haven't even heard of that movie. So seems like I recall you maybe telling me one time something about it. But anyway, well, the reason I asked is because at Rhodes there was a very interesting movie filmed. I think it was like in the 70s, and I remember watching it many years ago, and I've seen it a couple of times. Of course, I really enjoy World War II stuff and learning more about that and all the heroism and just the fascinating time in history. But the Guns of Navarone were actually filmed. Most of it was filmed, or a lot of it was filmed on the island of Rhodes. Okay, now Brian, have you ever watched the movie The Guns of Navarone?
I have not, John.
Okay, I'm really hurt. Okay. All right, you've got to broaden your horizons just a bit, but yeah, Anthony Quinn and Gregory Peck, who was a big star, in the '60s and the '70s, and was in that movie. But I won't go into all of it. But essentially, it's a fictional movie, but it has some, it's rooted in history, rooted in historical information taking place in about 1943 when the Italians had control of a lot of those Greek islands that some of them that we visited. And so, the Greeks and then the Allied forces are trying to recapture those. And the story is that they need to go rescue these British soldiers, but they can't pass through this island on these ships because these huge, huge guns, um, are basically anchored and protected inside of this massive cliff that shoots out over the straits of these areas where these ships are going to go through, and so it's basically impregnable. And so this small commando team, has to go through all scale this huge cliff and get up there and figure out a way to destroy those guns before the ships get by. And and of course they do in the end. Sorry to ruin it for you, but they do blow up the guns. But so I remember when we went to Rhodes and we were visiting there, you and I and our group, and I was like, this looks familiar, and I was trying to think, is this the place? And sure enough, as we're walking through some of the stuff we're going to talk about in a moment, I was like, hey, yeah, I remember seeing this in the movie. Oh, that's cool. That's where this took place. And then of course, after visiting a place, when you've seen the movie, you go, "Oh, wait a minute, yeah, they really edited this, or that's not how it really was, or what it really looked like," and so it's a little disappointing. But anyway, so I mentioned all that to say basically that this is kind of a cool place to visit because of that, but more importantly, it's a cool place because this is where the Apostle Paul actually stopped and visited. If you were to look in your Bibles in Acts 21, the Bible mentions Rhodes. There's only one place in the New Testament, and really one other place in the Old Testament, the book of Ezekiel, where at least it's probably a reference to Rhodes, where this place is mentioned. And did you want to mention something about that, or say something about that? You know, a reference in Acts 21.
Well, it is a reference is a good word for it because, it's not a place that we have a whole lot of information about. It's a few verses, and Paul stopped here on his way from one place and on his way to another place. I will say that, as with many things, the island would like to claim that that brief reference was actually a longer period of time. I mean, we're not told, of course. We're just told that
Mhm.
he stopped here, but uh, you know, because of tourism and because of connection to Paul and that kind of thing, it, the island of Rhodes wants to say, well, no, he was here maybe a few days and preached and did that
Mhm.
kind of thing, but there's no indication in the text. It just says that it was a waypoint on the way to where he was going.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really not much of a mention in Acts 21. And then in
Well,
Ezekiel,
Well,
or
what
go
is
ahead.
imp what I no, go ahead, I'll come back to the Ezekiel pass in a minute, but what is important about that, I just wanna remind, all of us, is that this is at the end of Paul's 3rd missionary journey, and he's just had this great meeting with the elders of Miletus, a very tearful meeting, and, to remind them of their work and what all he had done. It's a goodbye, and then he sails from there to this island, Kos is how I would pronounce it, or Kos, C-O-S, and it seems like Luke is giving us sort of a day by day itinerary. Probably, okay, it took him about a day. You could go. This is about 40 miles, I think, from Miletus to Kos, and then a little longer from Kos to Rhodes. So what he's doing is chronicling for us and gives us an opportunity to check. Yeah, this is how it could have happened. I mean, this was the way it happened. Luke is so accurate and careful in showing us here are the stops he made along the road or along the way back to Rome, and that's where he's going. And so, but you were going to say something about the passage in Ezekiel.
Yeah, it's just a brief mention. Again, both of these are brief mentions. So the one in Ezekiel, they are mentioned as one of the nations that had traded with Tyre. Tyre and Sidon being the big Phoenician cities. So not too much mentioned. You did say though that he stopped here on the way to Rome, and that
Oh,
is
yeah,
true.
Jerusalem, sorry, yeah, thank you,
No, that
thank
is
you.
true. But he had a
Yeah.
little detour
A
on the
little
way.
detour, yeah, yeah. Jerusalem,
So,
Rome, Rome, Jerusalem, no,
well, he
obviously,
does.
yeah.
He is
Thanks for
going to
catching
Rome.
that,
He's just
yeah.
going the long route.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But, and I hope everyone will take an opportunity to kinda read through that text and to see, and maybe we can draw some, some lessons here at the end about all of this, but yeah, this is the last and very important, journey back to Jerusalem, but, hey, when you think of now Rhodes, because it is on one of the places that we stop, on some of our, trips around the Mediterranean, the cruise line stops there. Um, and we'll go into more detail about this, but Brian, can you give me 3 things very quickly that maybe when you think of Rhodes, what are 3 things that come to your mind that stand out to you?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I mean, it's a beautiful island in the Aegean there. It is a very, very pretty place. So blue, green water, really, really pretty. I mean, that's uh, kind of germane to the point, but I do remember it being very, very pretty. The second thing I remember is walking uphill. There's an Acropolis that reminded me a lot of the Acropolis in Athens, actually, with some of the buildings that were up there and how high it is and how far you can see. And then, of course, the Castle of the Knights, which is not an ancient, depending on how you define ancient, but it's not an
Yeah.
ancient building necessarily, but it is an important piece of history. So those are the three things that really stick out in my mind when it comes to roads.
Yeah, yeah. And those I would say that probably obviously for me, it would be the Acropolis as well at Lindos that we'll talk about in a moment. And, and yeah, it's there's just sort of a mystique, beautiful, sort of ancient feel, that in many ways sort of represents this medieval period. When you come into the harbor and you're able to look across and see some of those buildings you were talking about that aren't quite so ancient, but yet, they are the Templars, castle that's there, or the fortress that was there, and the museum that was inside of there. So definitely sort of that neat little aura, this rocky Greek, sort of iconic, picturesque Greek island in the Mediterranean. Um, and then so there's two for me. And then the third thing that when I think about Rhodes that kind of stands out is I guess the Colossus of Rhodes is one of the seven wonders of the world. But so that right away, and I'll add a fourth, right? The Apostle Paul stopped there. That's a great one, to think about that and where that was and how that happened and all that. But, well, let's go back, first and maybe talk just a little bit about, um, kind of some just general information about roads, and then we'll go and talk about what it was like when the Apostle Paul came there, and then, what you can actually see when you're there today. So, um, quickly, what are some things about Rhodes today? I mean, it's a Greek island, right? It belongs to the nation of Greece. Um, what else would you
Yeah,
say about it?
very popular tourist destination. Upwards of 2 million visitors a year. It's I you know again, it's just very pretty. It's pretty to go there. It's pretty to be there. The
Mhm.
Grecian economy is primarily run by tourism, so it's important for the Greek economy. It's important for where it is. It's actually closer to Turkey than it is to Greece.
Yeah,
You can take a ferry out of Athens, but I think it's a long ferry. Several hours to get from Athens, so it's easier to ferry out of Turkey to get there. And like you said, it used to hold the Colossus of Rhodes, and it doesn't anymore. But there are some replacements there. There's a stag and a hind that sit on pillars, and those are symbols of the island. And um, eh, very. again, touristy, but in a good way. There's a lot of amenities there and a lot of shops and that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's all the ancient things.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about the size of it too, kinda give people so the location is, we would say, what's kinda southwest of Ephesus, and southwest of Turkey, where and then of course thinking about Ephesus and going there, and then you can reach it by ferry from Piraeus, Athens, in 14 hours, right? And then from the port from Kusadasi, 6 hours is how long it would take you to get there, and then you could get there at about an hour and a half to 2 hours from Bodrum, which, as you mentioned, just close there to the southwestern part of Turkey. So that maybe that gives you some idea of kind of where it is. And but now let's talk about the size of it very quickly. 541 square miles. Now, I have to admit that just kind of goes over my head. Okay, how big is that? That's not real big. And I don't know if you've ever looked at a Texas map, but we live in Hayes County in Dripping Springs, Texas, and Hayes County is 693 square miles. So Hayes County, where I live as a county in Texas, is bigger than this island. Now I have to admit, everything's bigger in Texas, right? So our county, our county is pretty good size. When you go all the way from San Marcos to the south, and Dripping Springs is not even at the tip. I mean, it's on the further north part of it. But so it takes us about 45 minutes to drive from Dripping Springs to San Marcos, and that's not even, again, the fullest extent of the northern end of the county. So maybe that gives you some idea about the size of it. And then,
Well, and John, for those of us who are not from Texas, Rhode Island is 1,500, roughly 1,500 square miles. So the smallest U.S. state, Rhode Island, roughly 1,500 square miles. So that's a good reference point for roads.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I think we want to mention real quick before we get into what was it like when Paul visited there, um, is just knowing something about uh, that there is a city called Rhodes. So that's a little bit, it's the island of Rhodes. So it's kind of a geographical term referring to this island. But then there is a city called Rhodes. But then there's also, several other smaller towns and cities that make up Rhodes as well. And but with Lindos, and then the city of Rhodes itself being a part of it. So, and then there's I think a population of, what was it, about 120, let's see, 125,000, I think, is about the number of people that live on that island. So anyway, not too big, beautiful, but significant and important, especially in ancient times. So let's talk about that. Unless there's something else you wanted to mention about Rhodes
No,
and just
no, yeah,
facts.
we can get
Okay.
into
Okay.
what Paul
So
saw when he came here.
yeah. So what do you think? What did he see? Let's talk about, first of all, where he may have come into, because there's kind of two prevailing, or two views about that.
Well, and again, there's a traditional view, and then there's the kind of what you want it view. We talk all the time about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre versus the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. Both of those locations have been proposed for where Christ was crucified and buried, and you really want it to be the Garden Tomb because it's very picturesque, and it's how you imagine it in your mind's eye. Um, I get that impression about Lindos. So Lindos is one of the cities on Rhodes, and that is the place where um, Paul is said to have stopped, and then they've given the harbor a name, and it's St. Paul's Harbor now, and it's very pretty. It's actually a little heart shaped harbor. I'm going to take a quick aside. I like to take pictures along with the video when we're there, and I got to take a great picture of John and Carla with the heart shaped lake in the background. Well, that's actually St. Paul's Harbor. It's not the heart shaped lake.
Now you
But
got to be sure and post that on the on
I
the
will.
on
Yeah,
the on the
we'll
notes,
put
right?
that in the
That's
show
good.
notes
Yeah.
because that was a very fun place. But
Yeah.
um, I don't know, and John, I don't know if you've seen more evidence. I don't know that we have any evidence or really anything to say where he landed. So,
Yeah.
we want it to be Lindos, and so we're just gonna make it Lindos. That sometimes
Yeah.
happens, but what about
Well, and
the
I wonder if maybe it had something to do with, the Acropolis, that beautiful Acropolis, and, a lot of people coming in and out of there. But if you look at the island itself, it's sort of a spearhead shaped island, and those 2 harbors are, first of all, there's one on kind of the north. If you're thinking about this spearhead and it's pointing up almost kind of northeast toward modern day Turkey, Asia Minor in the ancient world, as we would think of it. And at that spearhead pointing toward Turkey is where the city of Rhodes is, and there is a harbor there, and that's where the cruise ships all come in today. And then if you travel down south on that island on its eastern side, about, I think it's around 35 miles, 40 miles, something like that. Seemed like it took us about 50 minutes to get there, Brian. Is that right? Can you
Yeah,
remember?
yep.
Yeah. And then you come to Lindos, where there is this little natural harbor that kind of, a little feature of the land, a promontory that just sort of juts out away from the island just a bit and creates those sort of unique geological features there that you're describing, like that heart shaped harbor. And I remember being there, and the guide that we had said, "Well, John, you're a Bible student," and well, I think he said Bible scholar. I said, "No, no, no, not a Bible scholar." He obviously didn't know me, but anyway, he said, "John, what do you think? Where did Paul land?" And and I was like, I'm not really, have the credentials to be able to tell you that necessarily. You would think that if he's coming from Miletus, that and he was, as the Bible says, that it seems like maybe a more natural place would have been on that northern tip up there, as they're hugging the coastline. But then it also could have been dependent upon the prevailing winds, right? And where it was driving them and how they kind of had to get there as to which side. And then also thinking about, well, what is it that they had in their cargo that they needed to unload? And now, someone's maybe asked, well, why are we talking about all this? Because Brian, when we go there, you like, to me, one of the neatest things is, let's go to the place where this happened. Let's walk in the steps of the Apostle Paul. And so now we're immediately met with this controversy or this debate or this discussion, right? Which harbor was it? And and so I think a case could probably be made for either one. So now, well, either one. Now let's just say he came into the harbor at Rhodes on the north. What would he have seen when he came in there to that harbor?
Well, we moved from one controversy and immediately into another one. So
Uh,
Rhodes, obviously known for the Colossus of Rhodes, is one of the 18, I mean, 7 wonders of the ancient world.
yeah,
It's one of the
that's a
7
running
wonders.
running joke with us. Yeah, so
Yeah, the the joke, if we've not said it on the podcast before, is that there's about 25 of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It seems like everyone wanted that designation, but
yeah, and I know Herodotus was the one that supposedly gave us the first seven, but it seems like everywhere we go, right? It's like, oh, this is one of the ones. It's like, how many are there? Okay, anyway, go ahead.
so the question though is, first, what is the Colossus of Rhodes? And then second, where was it? And then third, was it there when Paul was there? So the original Colossus is a statue, and I don't. You remember how big it is, John? I looked, but I've
Yeah,
already forgotten.
I mean, it seems like it was around 90 meters tall, something like that. Yeah, I had read about that a while back, and I've slept since then. But to give you some, it's almost as tall. I do remember this by way of comparison. It's almost as tall as the Statue of Liberty.
Okay.
So that gives you
Yeah,
some
and I
indication.
90 feet, maybe. Um, I don't know if it's 90 feet or 90
Yeah,
meters,
yeah.
but
Feet. Yeah.
yeah. So still massive either way. I mean, 90 feet's the same as a 9-story building. Very,
Oh,
very
here
big
here we go.
statue.
Here's one that says 105 feet. Sorry, Brian, 105 feet. So and we're guessing that because it's based on cubits. They gave us the cubit size in the ancient world, but as you know, the cubits could vary because a cubit usually was from person's wrist bone to his elbow, and well, obviously that varies. So 18 to 26 inches. So okay, go ahead.
Well, so anyway, and it's John, what is it a statue of?
Well, some say that, and I think probably so, that it was of the god Helios, right? That they believe basically gave them the victory over um, the Macedonians, or the vestige of the Greek Empire, and one of Alexander's generals that after he had died, had control of the area of Turkey, and so they wanted the people of Rhodes to sort of acquiesce to their demands of letting them control that island, and because it's an important island in terms of trade and stopping off point, but they resisted, right? And they won that battle, and this huge, huge battle of these ships coming to try to take over the island. And so they said, "Well, we've won this great battle. It's to this sun god Helios." And I don't know. Have you read anything different about that? About what that statue was supposed to represent?
No, well, and I think so. One of the reasons there is some controversy or question. Let's just go through the history real fast. So it was built, and then it only stood for 66 years. So it was destroyed in an earthquake. So if this 90-foot, said it was on a 10-foot base, and um, some say that it may have even served as a lighthouse. This massive statue, but it only actually was upright in its original form for 66 years. And there's another question about location. So it has been said, and probably by legend more so, that the statue straddled the harbor. So one foot was on one pillar and another foot was on another pillar, and it straddled the harbor. And this earthquake brought it down. Well, I think more recent archaeologists think that it was probably in the temple of Helios. So there's a temple today that it exists, but it's actually buried. It's right under the palace of the grandmasters. So I think a lot of archaeologists now believe that it was more likely in the courtyard of that temple.
Yeah.
But either way, when it came tumbling down the first time, there's another question as to what happened to it. Did they try to rebuild it? Did they just leave it right where it sat? Um, John, you were reading an article about that, right? Do you want to talk
Well,
about that a little
I
bit?
yeah, I mean, this whole statue business is fascinating, and we do, there's no remains of it today. Uh, there's been a debate about, well, what happened to it? How do we even know it existed? And it's essentially based on like people like Herodotus or Pliny or others that talked about it, and some that evidently had witnessed it and described it. So I don't have any doubt but what it existed. This huge, huge statue made out of bronze, by the way, and so quite valuable, quite expensive, quite extensive. And so where exactly was it? And I have to mention this. Some say that it was, as you said, straddling the harbor on either side, and you would sail underneath it. Well, okay, I don't want to go into great detail, but this statue, is of Helios. He's not wearing a lot of clothes, and so kind of an odd thing to think about, sailing underneath that. But I don't know that it just seems to me architecturally that would be really hard to design that and have that place there. But the article that you were asking me about, Brian, is one that I just was reading the other day, and I stumbled across it because it really stood out to me as being something so unusual. There are a number of good videos on YouTube, by the way, that will give you the history of the Colossus and its significance, and its what all are saying. But what stood out to me and where I first ran across it was in a great blog that I receive on a weekly basis from BiblePlaces.com by Dr. Todd Bolin. And if you don't know about that site, you need to go there. It's and subscribe to that newsletter, and it's great, great stuff. And he does a lot of linking you to other things. And one of the things that he linked me to was, or that I saw on the blog, was a link to an article saying basically that the Colossus of Rhodes may have actually been there when Paul came there. Now that's not what it said, but the time frame was is that it lasted a lot longer than the prevailing view was about that earthquake. And I thought, okay, some sort of aberrant view here, whatever. But it's actually published in the Ancient Near East Today, and in 2024. So in the December issue 2024, volume 12, um, there is a great article about that says, yes, there was an earthquake, but it was repaired, and that it was actually standing there when the Apostle Paul came. So check that out, that article, and we'll probably try to put a link on that as well in the show notes. But um, so huge statue. Paul comes in there. Unless there's something else you want to say about that before we move on.
Yeah, just and again, this is kind of where legend grows over time, but allegedly what happened was after its collapse, it just stayed there. So maybe this is after a second collapse, if it rebuilt and it collapsed. But by the time that the Arabic uh, nations kind of were conquering the world and that kind of thing, by the time they got to Rhodes, it was just laying on the ground. And there's a tradition and a legend that says it took 1,000 camels and they took it all back and sold it in pieces. So that is partially what's contributing to the question and the intrigue. And that was in 653 AD, roughly. So you know, kind of like a fish story. It grows and it gets bigger and it gets bigger. I don't. Did it take exactly 1,000 camels? I'm not sure, but large statue, and again, that's what happened to it. Arab raiders carried it off in that 7th century.
Hey, by the way, another little interesting connection on that is that that word Colossus in its earliest form really just meant a statue, but then it sort of morphed into, because it became associated with this particular statue as when we think of a colossus, like a huge, huge statue. And if you listen carefully, you can hear in the word colossus the word Colosseum. Okay. And the Colosseum in Rome wasn't given that name by the people during that time in which it was built. That was not known. I think it was actually the Flavian amphitheater, or the Flavian theater. And so this was a name given later on. Why? Because there was a huge Colossus statue built next to the Colosseum, and some say that it was Nero building the statue of himself, and then later on it gets moved um, down a little bit closer, actually, to the Colosseum to make way for one of the temples that's built up there. And so they then decked it out with a crown of rays of light coming from it, that then represents the god Helios. So was it Nero at first? And then they decided, let's not, just tear this statue down. Let's make something out of it. Kind of an interesting thing. So the term Colosseum actually gets connected to this Colossus statue that's standing by there. All right. Okay. So
Well,
that's a little
no,
connection there. Yeah.
I do want to take another very quick detour that has a connection to Nero. Um, so Rhodes is actually the home of a bunch of famous sculptors, and the I don't I'm not an art person by any stretch of the imagination. I like to look and ooh and ah, but I don't know what's good and what's bad and that kind of thing. Um, but there is a very famous statue, and John, do you remember seeing it in the Vatican? It is
Yes.
the
Well, I say I don't even. I've already
yeah, no, I
anticipated
think
what.
you know where we're going.
There's lots
It's
of
the
statues there, but
sculpture
yeah, yeah.
of
I think I know what you're
the
talking about.
priest of Apollo and his children being eaten by two snakes.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you uh
Yeah, it's
you
right there
remember
in the
that?
little atrium area,
Yeah.
really, yeah, and a little alcove there on the side. Yeah, yeah.
So this stuff is really fun to me. So the Trojan War. We're going to go all the way back to the Trojan War. When the Trojan horse is delivered, this guy and his sons comes out and says, We should not accept this gift. It might be a trap, this kind of thing. Well, two sea snakes come out of the sea and attack him and his sons. And the people take that as a sign that that guy was not right and that they should accept the Trojan horse, which of course was the downfall of uh, them there. So anyway, a very very famous sculptor, and his name is
That lived on the island, right? That was on
yeah, well,
the
his
road.
name
Yeah.
is Charis of Lindos,
Yeah.
and I probably
Yeah.
butchered that, but of Lindos I know is
No,
right because
Carre sounds better.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce it either. I've seen it, but yeah.
And the name of the statue is, oh dear, why do I do this? Lacuan.
Yeah, like
Um,
yeah. La Quan, I believe is how you say it. Yeah.
it's got an umlaut over the O, so you can
Yeah.
figure that out at home. But anyway, it was actually found in Rome in Nero's palace, and of course now resides in the Vatican. So, very interesting connection from Troy to Rhodes to Rome. Now is in the Vatican. So um, that's that's just neat. I don't know
Well,
that.
I think I mean what you're saying is kind of interesting because to get back to what we were talking about with Paul is that when he comes there, this is a by now a Roman controlled island, but it was a Greek island first, or at least of the Greek, heritage of people. I know that's the Macedonians, the Greeks, and all the different um, sort of ethnicities associated with among the Greek people. But anyway, heavily influenced by Greek, there is a school of rhetoric, rhetorical school, that where a well-known school of where rhetoric was taught is at this place. So Greek, Roman um, ideology, philosophy, an important place for stopping off for trade. So when Paul comes there, he's going to encounter this culture, and if he comes into that northern part of the tip of the spear there, and if he's if Colossus is straddling the harbor, which he probably isn't, he's going to sail right underneath that, and he comes to this city, and well-known artist statues end up back in Rome, as you were talking about there. That's created by this guy that also created the Colossus here, and then he's also going to encounter in Rhodes, the city of Rhodes, up on the Acropolis there, a temple to Apollo. Now, you were just talking about this Laocoon. There was this priest, and he supposedly was a priest of the temple of Apollo there at the city of Troy. And Apollo is worshipped all over the Mediterranean world, and this pagan god. Now, as a little interesting side note here, and I had to imagine that when Paul came here, this probably just really had to have irritated him just a bit, because we know that King Herod the Great, who's long dead now, right? When Paul was preaching, but because he dies not long after the birth of Jesus, King Herod the Great visited this island several times, and he came here on one occasion to meet up with Octavian after the Battle of Actium, when basically Octavian is avenging the death of Julius Caesar and fighting against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and so there's a huge battle there, not too far from Rhodes, the Battle of Actium, uh, and in Greece. I say not too far; it's actually a little further than that. But anyway, so um, King Herod the Great had been a client king of Mark Antony, and now what do we do? Because, in fact, do you remember King Herod built a fortress on the northwestern side of the temple that for the Romans to live in there, for the military power to kind of watch out over the temple, and he named it after Mark Antony. So this tells you a little bit about the political chicanery involved in King Herod and all of this. And what does Herod do? Herod goes to Rhodes and he meets up with Octavian and garners his favor. Now, wait a minute. This is the guy that, first of all, Mark Antony was in part responsible for the death of Julius Caesar, or, at least now he's trying to overthrow Octavian. And now, so King Herod changes sides. And yet, in a sort of remarkable, magnanimous way, I guess, Octavian says, okay, you can still have control over Palestine. But now here's the thing that must have really angered Paul is that there was a temple there to Apollo built there in Rhodes, and an earthquake destroys it. And what does Herod do? He gives money to help finance the rebuilding of a pagan temple. I mean, don't forget about the assimilation of the culture that took place among some Jews in the ancient world, and the frustration that must have had for Jewish zealots, but now for Christians who are saying, you can't compromise like this. There is one true living God.
Yeah, and that, I mean, again, that's such a fascinating thing. I don't know, John, when I was reading and researching, when I realized that Herod had come here and Octavian had come here, and this is an important little island. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like I was trying to think of a modern equivalent, but I'm not as up to date. But I get like a Geneva feel almost.
Hayes
Like
County. No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
he's got
Yeah, yeah.
no, like where people will go to have these important meetings, and they'll or we've got places that are named after treaties and that kind of thing. I mean, it kind of was a place where you could meet and do this political wheeling and dealing. So really interesting. Unless you have anything more about the ancient stuff, I think we probably better move towards the
Well, the
slightly
only, the
less
only other
ancient
thing,
stuff.
yeah, quickly, I know we need to talk about Lindos, but so this is what Paul encounters, this Roman pagan world. But now, if he lands at the other place, which is Lindos, then what's he going to see? And maybe we can talk about then what you're going to see there today and make that our segue into that. So, what's up there? When you go to Lindos, and and it's a really cool place. What's there?
Well, there's the Acropolis there, and again, Acropolis just is a word meaning hill city. It's on the tallest point, and there's some remains of some temples up there. And again, I got a very Athens vibe. I don't know if that's how you felt about it, but
Mhm.
I felt very similar when you went to the Acropolis of Lindos that I got in the Acropolis in Athens. Lots of temple remains, and there's some columns that are still standing. And um, maybe you remember better than I do.
Yeah,
There's
well, there
one to
is.
Zeus, I think.
Yeah, and there's a temple of to Athena, which is
Right.
kind of neat
Yep.
to think about. That she's not just there in Athens. So maybe you were talking about that vibe you got of Athens. That's part of it there. But there's a series of different um, time periods represented there by the architecture, from the Crusader period and the Byzantine period and the Roman period and the Greek period, and it's up on this hill. So that sort of walk through history is absolutely fascinating. And that's where, by the way, when you watch the Guns of Navarone, the movie, you're going to see them running through some buildings, some ancient buildings and temples and columns. And that's kind of where it is. They actually have those steps going up to that. Remember, it's what they call the Propylaea, this major sort of entrance going up to that, to the temple up there. And I think there is a temple to Zeus, if I recall correctly, as you mentioned. But and it's quite a hike. What do you remember going up there? And uh,
Yeah, and I was trying to remember because I can't remember the reason, but I remember we went up and we got stopped and we stood there for a second, and then we got a little further in and we stopped for another second, and then I remember lots of stairs and I remember lots of stopping, but I can't remember exactly what the events that precipitated the stopping were. I do remember. Okay, so coming down, we got off at the bus and we walked up a little ways and we went through a little town, and I don't remember if that town has a name, but it's like a shoppy area. And then
very
we can
cool, by the way, isn't it? Very neat little town. Yeah.
yes, well, and that's I remember going up. I remember doing our thing on the Acropolis. Well, I remember coming back down. I think you said something along the lines of, you know, get a snack, or we might, be on the bus for a while.
Oh,
And so, yes, every all roads into Greek and Turkish food. But we came
and
down.
I'm laughing about something else I'll tell you in a second anyway.
Okay, well, we came down and we stopped, and it was just a guy right there. Selling euros is, they're everywhere, but had the meat on the spit, and that was phenomenal. But we were kind of in a hurry, and so uh, I had him make me one, and I took it to go, and I walked down, and of course, some of the best food I've ever had. And I don't know where I stopped. I don't know the name of the guy. It's just like a street vendor right there. But I walked down and ate my euro and got back on the bus, and then. I was glad I did, because I think I remember it was a second or two before we got to eat again that day. But
Yeah,
very good.
well, no, and what happened in our the typical frustration that I have with trying to coordinate with our guides, which, they're generally all great, but usually the guides want to, you to go to a place that they recommend because maybe they might, get a percentage of a big group eating there, or they have in mind another place that's kind of different from what we're thinking. And of course, by now it's noon, and I thought, this is great. Let's just eat here. We can just scatter in this little shopping area, and lots of local cuisine that just looked like really good. And he said, no, no. He said, let's get back to, go ahead and we'll visit the top, and then we'll come back and meet at the bus, and then we'll drive on down to the city of Rhodes, and where the Grandmaster's, fortress is there, and there's a good shopping area. And he's right. There was some cool shopping areas and food there, choices there, but that was going to be like an hour or two after, right?
Yeah.
Lunch period. And John Moore has to eat at 12 o'clock, or he gets a little hangry. And so we're walking by all this really good looking street food stuff. I was like, what? And then I felt bad because we'd already told everybody, no, we're going to eat. So I was like, okay, we just got to grab it. We got to grab something, because that's going to be another hour to get there or whatever. And it was awesome, but I did kind of feel bad when we're walking up to the bus and we're cramming this food down, and people are kind of looking at us like, hey, I thought you said we're going to eat somewhere else. And so anyway, but that was a very, very interesting little place, I have to admit. I enjoyed it. I think it's an awesome, iconic spot.
Yeah, and I again, and we didn't talk, or we've kind of hit around it, but the Acropolis of Lindos is also very, very cool. Not only are there ancient things up there, not only is there the Propylaea and these ancient temples and that kind of thing, it's a gorgeous spot. I've said it a couple of times that it's a very beautiful island. It overlooks what they call St. Paul's Harbor, and again, I remember this blue green water, and just a very, very pretty place. So Lindos well worth the stop, and Rhodes obviously well worth the stop. But let's talk about now where we went from the Acropolis of Lindos to kind of what you were hinting at, down the hill where we ended up eating.
Yeah, well, so got back on the bus, went back to the city of Rhodes, and there is this fortress looking facility, which is now a museum, and it belonged to the Templars, or some say the Hospitallers of the medieval period. Well, what in the world is that? Um, Reminds us, number one, of the importance and the location of this place, because during the medieval period, when people from Europe in these various nations were sending soldiers, crusaders, down to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslim conquest, from the Muslim invasion in that area, they need places to stop along the way for respite or for care. Um, and this is on the way. It makes sense. Rhodes, Cyprus. And so if you're going to stop there, you need a place where people can feel safe, where they can be taken care of. And so, as you can imagine, a lot of lore and history becomes associated with that area as well. So there is that connection that is important to the development of things that occur after the establishment of the church and the fall of the Roman Empire and all of that. But So I don't know if that's what you were asking about, but and you probably read a lot more about it than I have.
Well, it is, and lots of different connections. For one, I don't know. The Crusades present a moral conflict, obviously, because the church, the Catholic Church, was not right in a lot of what took place in the Crusades. They obviously created a lot of bloodshed, and they were not the Christ Crusaders, right? They went in and raped and pillaged and plundered like pretty much every other army that has ever been. Um, that being said, there are two important outcomes from the Crusades. One is this conflict with Islam and the Muslim conquest. Um, Two very important places. One is right here where we're talking about this western edge of Turkey, eastern part of Greece. That's really a front line of this conquest, or becomes a front line of this conquest. And then also in Spain, preventing the Islamic conquest from coming into Spain from the south, crossing over the Gibraltar Strait there. So those two things were important victories for the Crusades, being able to stop the Islamic conquest right there. But also, the Crusades actually brought about this European revival in interest in original languages. So, as the Crusaders started to bring things back, things were written in Greek, that were written in Hebrew. Again, not I'm not condoning all of that action, but when it arrives in Europe, people all of a sudden now want to start studying Greek and studying Hebrew and understanding things, and they gave way to development of our modern critical text. So what we have in our Greek text and what we have in our Hebrew text, what we can know about the Bible, is due in large part to what was brought back during the Crusades. So they really present a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of negative that occurs, but there's also a lot of positive. And almost, in my mind, so where we're conflicted morally, we have a crossroads. Well, Rhodes is also a crossroads of the Crusades. It was a place where crusaders would stay and launch from, but it was also a place that was ultimately conquered by the Turks. It was also a place where um, battles were fought. So there's a very interesting crossroads in Rhodes that reminds us of the greater conflict between the Western Church and the Islamic conquest. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Really is. And well, as we kind of begin to bring this session or this episode to a close, what would you say personally about this place that really meant a lot to you, and it would help you spiritually? Why should anybody even stop here? A
well,
Christian, a Christian.
you know, any connection to Paul and the world that he experienced is valuable, but I really do think about those crusades a lot. And again, I conflicted because of how wrong they were, yet how convicted they were. The people who are willing to go to war for Christianity are very convicted in what they believe, and I think sometimes that we have failed to integrate what the Bible says into our life as well as they did. And I'm not saying that we need to go to war, and I'm certainly not saying that we need to commit the same atrocities that they did. But I'm saying, how convicted am I about what the Bible says? Am I willing to get up out of my comfort zone, travel all the way across the world, engage in spiritual warfare? Converting people, evangelizing people, that kind of thing, or am I even willing to go out into my own community, or is it just a small segment of my life?
Mhm.
The those guys who left England sometimes traveled all the way through Europe, down through Rhodes, all the way to the Holy Land. You have to be pretty convicted in order to do that, and that conviction is to be commended, even if it was led to some other things that we wouldn't be in favor of. Am I that convicted? Am I that interested in the cause of Christ? Am I willing to put They had crosses on everything. They had Bibles not necessarily Bibles, but they were interested in the cause of Christ. And I don't
Yeah.
know sometimes that we're as interested as they were.
Yeah. Well, and I think about that also with Paul, Brian. Same thing. Think about the miles he traveled, the things he endured in those travels. It wasn't always easy being on a ship, having to walk all those places, and then to encounter these cultures. You mentioned at the outset, did he stay here and for a little while and preach and teach? Well, it's hard to think that he didn't at least try to talk to somebody uh, while he stopped here, whether it be just for a day or for a week, however long he was there. And I wonder about that as well. That is on my mind a lot when we travel to these places today, and thinking about whether it's talking to our guides or the people that we interact with. And it's so easy in our life to just get caught up in all the you know the physical and the material world that we live in, and the sights that we're seeing, and we forget about people. We forget about people that are made in the image of God. We forget about the things that are most important and the things that really last. And so let me just say this at the end here, talking about things that really last. Well, that was an impression that it's like with so many of these places that was left on me in visiting this area, is that these temples, and many of them were just obviously uncovered by archaeologists and then have been restored to the state that they're in today. Sometimes you'll find columns existing just as they did, but more times than not, it's that they found them in ruin and they've kind of set them back up to give us an idea of what it looked like. But whether it was the temple to Athena, or just a few columns that remain to the temple of Apollo there in Rhodes, um, those things are gone. Or the Colossus, it's totally gone. There's not one trace of the Colossus that has been to this day discovered. So the statues and the buildings of men, they don't last. They disappear. They're not permanent. But the gospel lives on. The message of truth about who God is, the message of hope of the forgiveness of our sins and fellowship with God, and the redemption of our lives. And that's a message that transcends time and that has continued to go on. And I will say this, that it's not dependent upon a single place. We don't, as important as Jerusalem is and Israel is, and Rhodes even, we don't have to go there and visit that site to make a pilgrimage there to go to heaven, right? That's not required. It's not dependent upon that. Now, those facts and that information give us then a reason for believing in the witness of what these men have written in Scripture. The word of God is what we appeal to. Well, how do we know that they were accurate? So we're thankful for the archaeological discoveries. We're thankful that we can visit these places today. But in the end, you don't have to. Just open up your Bible, see that when you read about these places that they're real, because it gives us that historical context in which the theology and the message was basically couched in, and found itself in. But focus on the message. What can we learn when we read through the book of Acts? What do we learn about the ministry of Jesus when we studied Israel, or go to those places there that we'll talk about in future podcasts? What do we read about this man Jesus and the life of people who gave their lives for the advancement of that message? And why did they do it? What's so important about it? So I don't know, Brian. I'll give you the last word, and then we'll just wrap up.
Well, and I think, to combine kind of what you're saying, what I'm saying, I think about what Paul says in Second Corinthians. Our weapons are not. We don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but we've been given weapons for tearing down the strongholds. Well, the strongholds are what people believe about Jesus, and what people believe in their mind about God and who He
Mhm.
is. And it's not that we are fighting a physical war, but that we are have been given the truth about God and who He is and who Jesus was, and we've been given everything we need to engage with people talk about their beliefs, talk about what they believe about God, and to be able to win victories for Christ, which doesn't result in death and destruction, but results in eternal life and peace and joy and these kind of things. So,
Amen. I started talking at the beginning of this particular podcast about the Bible and the guns of Navarone. What in the world, Well, and remember I said, going there and then coming back and watching the movie, it's a little bit disappointing and so forth, but unlike the movies, when you come and watch it, it sort of removes a little of the mystique associated with it, and you realize, oh, there's really not a huge big cliff and a cave where these guns were located, that was all fabricated and mythological. Okay. Unlike that, when you go and visit the Bible lands and you see these things and you read about them or study about them, the Bible itself now becomes even much larger and more interesting and more exciting, um, because of what we're talking about, right? So just the opposite effect with regard to movies, with regard to the Bible, man, it's awesome. And so keep studying, keep learning. That's the message today. Keep seeing these wonderful things that God has revealed to us in his word and preserved in the archaeological record. And just hope that you can enjoy that as you continue to read the Bible. Brian, great to be with you, man. What another great episode. And we look forward to more. But until then, we pray that God's blessings will be upon you, and we'll see you later.
John and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Bible Passages podcast. One of the missions of Bible Passages is to deliver as much free Bible content to people as possible, but we can't do that without your support. First, you can like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Second, you can leave a comment on this video or this episode so that we know that you're listening. And third, if you feel compelled to give, you can do so at BiblePassages.net/give. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you in the next episode.